picture this. You just walked into a dark, quiet office.
Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And a prime suspect for a massive corporate espionage case has just fled the building.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And their computer monitor is, still glowing in the dark. It's casting this pale light across the desk.
A classic crime scene.
Exactly. You step closer and you can see the cursor blinking rhythmically on the screen.
Right, so the machine is totally active.
Completely alive. Maybe there's a terminal window open, or I don't know, maybe a file transfer is actively ticking up to 100%.
Let's talk about high stakes.
Yeah. And your immediate visceral gut instinct, the exact instinct that was drilled into old school, traditional digital investigators for decades, is to reach down, grab that thick black power cord, and just pull the plug straight out of the wall.
Because you want to freeze the machine.
Right. Your brain tells you to cut the power, preserve the physical hard drive exactly as it is right now.
So you can take it back to the lab and analyze it in this perfectly sterile environment.
Exactly. But here is the terrifying reality of modern cybercrime. If you pull that plug, you instantly vaporize the single most critical piece of evidence in that entire room.
Yeah, you really do.
In just a fraction of a second, the system's RAM, the volatile active memory that has the attacker's live digital footprints, their unencrypted passwords, the network connections they have open right then and there, it is wiped entirely clean.
Just gone forever.
Gone. In a desperate attempt to, save the evidence, you actually just destroyed the case.
It's totally true.
You are standing there staring at an invisible ticking clock, and the rules of the game have completely changed.
It really is the ultimate high-stakes dilemma in modern incident response.
It's wild.
It is.
Yeah.
Because we are so heavily conditioned by television and old textbooks to think of digital forensics as this static post-mortem analysis of a dead frozen hard drive.
Right, like an autopsy.
Yeah. Exactly like an autopsy. But modern advanced attackers, the ones who are actually stealing corporate secrets or, launching ransomware, they don't just leave a neat little trail of files sitting on a disk for you to find.
Oh, they're way smarter than that.
They are. They live in the volatile memory. They operate exclusively in the fleeting electrical pulses of a running machine.
Wow.
Yeah. So if the power dies, they just vanish like ghosts.
Okay, we have to unpack this because this completely flips the script on everything we think we know about investigating a digital crime scene.
It really changes everything.
It does. We are crossing the yellow tape into a very volatile environment today. But before we dive into the actual mechanics of capturing those ghosts, I want to take a quick second to address you, our listeners.
Absolutely.
Especially the incredibly driven students from the Dr. Sam Pack College of Business and all the future IT leaders who are tuning in to build their skill sets.
Which is so important.
It really is. If you want to position yourself for a remarkably bright, lucrative future in your chosen career, you need these insider practical tech tips.
You definitely do.
So please take just a second right now to like, subscribe, and share this deep dive. And definitely check out the description below because we've linked some high-value resources there that are, frankly, absolutely essential for your professional growth and continuous learning.
Yeah, and it's really all about building a highly specialized toolkit.
Right.
The concepts we are discussing today, understanding the architecture of active memory in virtual environments, these are exactly what separates a standard entry-level IT worker from a strategic, high-level cybersecurity analyst or incident responder.
The people making the big decisions.
Exactly. It's the difference between just managing the technology and truly understanding how the technology can be weaponized or secured.
Exactly. You want to be the person who knows why pulling the plug is a disaster, not the person who accidentally ruins the entire investigation.
Right. You don't want to be that guy.
Definitely not. So let's orient ourselves here. From what we covered last week in Chapter 8, which focused on media files and digital forensics, we were looking entirely at static files.
Right. Things like images, videos, documents.
Yeah, things that sit perfectly still on a disk, waiting patiently to be analyzed. But today, we are transitioning into the main event.
Fun stuff.
The really fun stuff. We are exploring Chapter 9, Virtual Machine Forensics and Live Acquisitions Forensics.
This is such a critical area.
It is. And this deep dive is based on the incredibly comprehensive 2025 edition of the Guide to Computer Forensics and Investigations by Nelson, Stewart, Phillips, and Wilson.
A fantastic resource.
Oh, it's the best. And for those of you following along in your coursework, this is actually the 9th of our 15-chapter journey.
And our mission for this deep dive is intensely practical and quite frankly, heavily applicable to the enterprise business world.
So what are we actually tackling?
Well, we are going to learn how to track digital footprints through virtual environments. And by that, I mean entire corporate networks and servers that do not even physically exist.
Which still blows my mind a little bit.
I know, right? And then we are going to explore the high wire act of how to legally, ethically, and technically capture volatile data while a system is still actively running.
That sounds intense.
It is. For any business student or IT professional stepping into the corporate world today, understanding these real-world applications is no longer just an optional elective.
Right.
It is the absolute core of modern incident response and corporate security.
Well, let's start with this foundational idea of virtual environments then. Let's talk about the phantom computers.
Okay, I like that term.
Thanks, because before you can even begin to capture evidence from a running machine, you have to wrap your head around the dizzying fact that the quote-unquote machine you're looking at on the screen might just be an illusion.
Yeah, it might not be real hardware.
Exactly. We are moving from the physical hardware you can actually touch with your hands to virtual hardware constructed entirely out of code.
It's a big paradigm shift.
It really is. So let's set the baseline here. What exactly is a virtual machine, or a VM, and why do massive businesses and enterprises care so deeply about them?
So at its most fundamental architectural level, a virtual machine is just a software-based emulation of a physical computer.
Okay.
It is software pretending, very convincingly, to be hardware.
Like an actor.
Exactly like an actor. If you log into a virtual machine, it behaves exactly like a real computer sitting under your desk.
Right.
It has its own isolated operating system, its own applications, its own file system, its own virtual network card.
But it's all fake.
Well, it's not fake, but it exists entirely as a highly complex block of code running on top of a physical host machine.
Got it. So why is this such a big deal for businesses?
From a corporate business perspective, the value proposition is absolutely massive. Think about the overhead of hardware costs alone.
Oh, yeah. Servers are not cheap.
They are definitely not. Let's say a company needs to run 10 different legacy applications. And for security and compatibility reasons, each application requires its own dedicated server.
Okay, so normally that's a lot of metal.
Right. 10 years ago, you'd have to buy 10 separate physical metal servers. You have to power them, cool them, maintain the hardware, and rent physical rack space in a data center just to hold them.
Which is incredibly expensive and highly inefficient, especially because aren't most servers only using a fraction of their actual processing power most of the time?
Exactly. They're just sitting there idling.
Right, like a sports car stuck in traffic.
That's a perfect way to put it. It is wasted capital. But with virtualization, that company can buy one highly powerful physical server, load it up with terabytes of RAM and massive processors, and run all 10 virtual machines simultaneously on that single box.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it drastically offsets hardware costs, vastly reduces the physical footprint, slices cooling and electricity bills, and allows IT departments to spin up entire complex virtual networks within minutes.
Rather than waiting weeks for physical hardware to be shipped and installed.
Exactly. It's revolutionary for business.
It's really the ultimate optimization of resources. But if these VMs are just, complex software acting like hardware, they can't just float in the ether, right?
They need a foundation.
Right. There has to be a master program managing them, something allocating the physical RAM to the virtual RAM, or routing the virtual network traffic through the physical network cable.
Yes. And that master program brings us to the most important technical term in this entire discussion, the hypervisor.
The hypervisor, okay.
The hypervisor is the overarching software engine that creates, runs, and manages these virtual machines. It is literally the traffic cop between the physical hardware and the virtual environments.
Okay, traffic cop. That makes sense.
And in the world of IT administration and digital forensics, you absolutely must fundamentally understand the architectural difference between the two main types of hypervisors. Type 1 and Type 2.
Okay, let's break those down, because I know they represent two entirely different philosophies of computing. Let's start with Type 1.
Sure. So Type 1 is universally referred to in the industry as a bare metal hypervisor.
Bare metal.
And the name is quite literal. It's called bare metal because the hypervisor software loads directly, natively, onto the physical hardware of the machine.
Meaning there's no operating system underneath it?
Exactly. It touches the bare metal. It does not need a separate underlying operating system like Microsoft Windows Server or Ubuntu Linux to function.
Wow.
Yeah, in a Type 1 architecture, the hypervisor is the operating system.
Okay, so who makes these?
Some of the major enterprise heavyweights in this space are VMware vSphere, Microsoft Hyper-V Server, Citrix Hypervisor, and enterprise-grade Red Hat Linux virtualization.
Okay, to put this in a real-world business context, let's picture an IT director trying to scale the infrastructure for a rapidly growing 500-employee enterprise.
Like Keyshawn from our test bank scenario.
Yes, exactly like Keyshawn. So he is building out a massive new server room. He is almost certainly going to choose a bare metal Type 1 hypervisor for his servers. But why? Why is Type 1 the inherently superior choice for that massive enterprise scale?
It comes down to raw performance, latency, and scalability.
Okay, how so?
When you deploy a Type 1 hypervisor, there is no middleman operating system consuming vital system resources just to keep itself alive.
Right,
Think about a standard Windows operating system.
right.
Even when it's doing absolutely nothing, Windows is still consuming gigabytes of RAM and CPU cycles just to run the graphical user interface, background telemetry, and system updates.
It's always doing something in the background.
Always. But a bare metal hypervisor strips all of that away. It is incredibly lightweight and purpose-built for one single job.
Which is managing the VMs.
Exactly. It communicates directly with the physical CPU, the memory, and the storage arrays. Because there is zero overhead from a middleman OS, Keyshawn can dedicate 99% of the server's physical resources directly to the virtual machine.
Oh, that's incredibly efficient.
It is. This means they can host hundreds or even thousands of virtual servers on a single, robust physical server cluster. The only actual limitations a Type 1 hypervisor faces are the raw physical constraints of the hardware itself.
Like the actual RAM sticks and hard drives.
Specifically, the amount of available physical RAM, the storage capacity of the drives, and the network throughput capacity. It is explicitly engineered for heavy-duty, high-availability enterprise environments.
That makes perfect sense for a massive server farm in a data center. But obviously, average users or individual developers aren't running bare metal hypervisors on their home laptops, right?
Oh, no, definitely not.
Which brings us to the Type 2 hypervisors. And these are often called hosted hypervisors.
Correct. And the architecture here is completely different. A Type 2 hypervisor rests on top of an existing, fully-fledged operating system.
Okay, so it has a middleman.
It does. So the physical computer boots up natively into Windows 11 or Mac OS or a standard Linux desktop.
It's like a normal computer.
Exactly. The user logs in, and then they open a standard application program, the hypervisor, which then boots up and runs the virtual machines within a window on their desktop.
So it's like a computer inside a window?
Exactly right. The host operating system acts as the intermediary between the hypervisor and the physical hardware. The most common ubiquitous examples here are VMware Workstation Player or Oracle VirtualBox.
So let's look at why someone would actually use this. Imagine you are a senior developer or a penetration tester, like Shani from our course material.
Shani. Good example.
Right. Your primary corporate laptop runs Windows 11 because, that's what your company uses for email documentation and chat.
Standard corporate stuff.
Yeah. But for your actual security testing, you really need to run Kali Linux, which is this highly specialized Linux distribution packed with ethical hacking and forensics tools.
Right.
You decide to install a Type 2 hypervisor like VirtualBox. Why do you do that instead of just, say, partitioning your hard drive and setting up your computer to dual boot into either Windows or Linux natively?
Because dual booting natively is incredibly rigid and highly disruptive to a modern workflow.
How so?
Well, if Shani dual boots, she has to completely shut down her physical computer, interrupt whatever she was doing, and restart the machine every single time she wants to switch from writing a vulnerability report in Microsoft Word to actually running a network scan in Kali Linux.
Oh, yeah, that would be incredibly annoying.
It's terrible for productivity.
Yeah.
But by utilizing a Type 2 hypervisor, Kali Linux simply runs inside a window, just like a web browser, right there on the Windows 11 desktop.
Oh, that's so much easier.
It is. She can literally drag and drop files from the Windows host directly into the Linux virtual machine. She can switch back and forth seamlessly without ever rebooting once.
That's amazing.
It provides incredible, frictionless flexibility for a single user who needs multiple environments running simultaneously.
I always like to visualize this using a real estate analogy.
Oh, let's hear it.
So think of a Type 1 hypervisor, like owning an entire apartment building. You are the landlord of the entire structure.
Okay, I'm with you.
You manage the raw infrastructure, right? The central plumbing, the main electrical grid, the structural foundation, and you partition it out directly to all your tenants, which are the virtual machines.
Right.
You are in total, unfiltered control of the bare metal of the building. But a Type 2 hypervisor is like renting a single room inside someone else's house.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. You can set up your room however you want. You can have your own furniture and your own rules inside that room. But ultimately, you are entirely subject to the overarching rules of the homeowner, which is the host operating system.
Yo.
If the homeowner decides to turn off the water, or in digital terms, if Windows decides to force a system restart for a mandatory security update at 2 a.m., your rented room gets forcibly shut down along with the rest of the house, regardless of what you were doing inside.
That is a phenomenal analogy. It perfectly encapsulates the hierarchy of resource control and dependency. In Type 2, the host OS really does hold all the cards.
But here is where it gets incredibly fascinating from an investigative standpoint,
Yeah.
and honestly, quite suspicious.
Suspicious is a good word for it.
We've just established that Type 1 is the gold standard for enterprise power and business scalability. So why is it that when digital forensic investigators are brought in to analyze a prime suspect's personal device or corporate workstation, they almost universally find Type 2 hypervisors installed?
Well, it goes right back to that exact rented room inside a house dynamic you just mentioned.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Suspects, bad actors, or rogue corporate employees engaging in intellectual property theft, they use Type 2 hypervisors precisely because they're easily accessible, they don't require reformatting the entire computer, and they act as a perfectly hidden computer inside a computer.
So it's a hideout.
Exactly. Think about the forensic footprint. If a suspect wants to download a cache of illegal files, launch a cyber attack, or quietly siphon off sensitive corporate databases, doing it directly on their primary company-issued Windows machine is corporate suicide.
Right, because the company monitors that.
They absolutely do. It leaves massive, glaring, undeniable footprints in the standard Windows registry, the system event logs, the browser history, and the network caches.
Yeah, the company's standard antivirus or IT monitoring software would flag it instantly. They would essentially be lighting a flare to enhance what they're doing.
Exactly. They need to hide in plain sight. But by quietly installing a Type 2 hypervisor like VirtualBox, they can spin up a temporary, completely isolated operating system within that virtual window.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, they can do all their dirty work inside the virtual machine, funneling their traffic through an encrypted virtual network adapter.
Wow.
And when they're done, they can potentially delete the entire virtual machine file with just a couple of clicks or, move it to a hidden thumb drive.
That is incredibly sneaky.
It is, because to the host operating system and to the company's automated security tools, it just looks like the user was running a generic application called VirtualBox.
It doesn't see what's happening inside the box.
Right. It is exponentially harder for a surface-level scan of the host operating system to peer inside that locked, encrypted virtual room and see the illicit activity that was taking place.
It creates a massive blind spot.
Exactly, which introduces a whole new layer of complex investigative hurdles.
Which brings us to the obvious next question. We know the bad guys are using these Type 2 VMs as their digital hideouts. They are conducting their operations from inside the rented room.
Yep.
So if we are the digital investigators called to the scene, how do we actually locate and breach these hidden rooms?
It requires a highly systematic surgical approach. Our forensic source materials actually mandate a strict 5-step VM analysis procedure that every analyst must adhere to.
Just to maintain the legal integrity.
Exactly. You have to ensure the evidence actually holds up in a court of law.
Okay, let's walk through the logic of this procedure. So step 1 is to image the host machine, which makes perfect sense. Before I go kicking down the doors of the virtual rented rooms, I have to secure the perimeter of the physical house.
Precisely. You must acquire a forensically sound, bit-for-bit physical image of the host computer's hard drive, along with collecting all overarching network logs and firewall data from the local environment.
You are preserving the macro environment before diving into the micro environments.
You've got it.
Okay, so I've got my physical image of the host. Step 2 is to locate the virtualization software and the VMs themselves. But, if I'm hunting a sophisticated suspect who is actively trying to hide their tracks, where exactly am I looking?
That's a good question.
I mean, if I'm staring at a massive 2-terabyte Windows hard drive, I can't just blindly click through folders for weeks.
Well, the irony of digital forensics is that the most common and obvious places are frequently the exact ones junior investigators overlook.
Really?
Yeah. When someone installs a Type 2 hypervisor like VirtualBox or VMware, The default save path for creating those massive virtual hard drive files is usually right there in the open.
You're kidding.
Nope. It's often mapped directly to the current user's personal documents directory. You always check the standard users, documents, or virtual machines folders first.
But assuming they aren't completely incompetent and they've hidden the files deep in some obscure system directory or changed the file extensions to look like a generic text file, what then?
And you don't look for the files themselves, you look for the breadcrumbs the operating system left behind.
Breadcrumbs? Like what?
You interrogate the host computer's registry.
Ah, the registry.
Right. The Windows registry is the central hierarchical database used to store low-level settings for the OS and applications. When virtualization software is installed, it weaves itself deeply into the registry.
Even if they uninstalled it.
Especially then. Even if the suspect actively tried to completely uninstall VirtualBox to cover their tracks, uninstallers are notoriously lazy.
They don't clean up after themselves.
Exactly. They almost always leave behind orphan registry keys, shared DLL file references, and specific installation paths. By querying the registry, the investigator can definitively prove that virtualization software existed on that machine at a specific point in time.
Wow, that's powerful. And what if the host machine happens to be running a Linux operating system instead of Windows? The registry doesn't exist on Linux.
Right. So in that case, the investigator would meticulously comb through the hidden configuration directories within the user's home folder.
Looking for what?
Specifically looking for dot files like .vbox or .vmware.
Okay. And we absolutely cannot forget the network clues either.
Definitely not.
Because if a virtual machine is connecting to the outside internet to exfiltrate stolen data or reaching out to a command and control server, it fundamentally requires a network adapter to bridge the gap between the virtual world and the physical network cable.
Yes, and this is a massive glowing giveaway. Hypervisors cannot magically summon an internet connection out of thin air.
They need a real path.
Exactly. To give the VM internet access, the hypervisor must install virtual network adapters directly onto the host operating system to act as a bridge.
So how do you find those?
If an investigator is examining a live Linux host, they would simply open the terminal command line and execute the command ifconfig.
Ifconfig.
Yep. This command queries the network stack and lists every single active network interface. Alongside the physical Ethernet or Wi-Fi cards, the investigator will instantly spot virtual adapters artificially created by the hypervisor.
And they stick out.
Oh yeah, they are often labeled with specific vendor MSE addresses.
And on a Windows machine.
On a Windows machine, you would just navigate to the control panel, drill down into network connections, and you would visually see fully formed active network adapters explicitly labeled VMware, Virtual Ethernet Adapter, or VirtualBox Host-Only Network.
Wow, they just put their name right on it.
They do. If you see those, you have absolute proof a VM is or was operating on that system.
Okay, so by interrogating the registry and checking the network adapters, we've confirmed the existence of the virtualization software.
Right.
Step 3 is to locate and export all the associated VM files out of our forensic image. Step 4 is to immediately record the cryptographic hash values of those extracted files to mathematically prove to a judge that our copy hasn't been altered by even a single bit.
Crucial step.
And step 5 is to finally open the extracted VM within our specialized forensic software, or mount it as an external drive so we can finally see what's inside.
Exactly.
But to actually execute steps 3, 4, and 5, I need to know exactly what kind of digital artifacts I'm looking for.
Right. You need to know the file types.
Yeah. If I'm digging through a hard drive, what do these phantom computers actually look like at the file level?
Well, to the host operating system, a virtual machine doesn't look like a computer. It just looks like a tightly grouped collection of files with very specific proprietary extensions.
Okay.
And memorizing these extensions is fundamental for any digital analyst. Let's dissect a VMware environment first. When you create a VM in VMware, the overarching blueprint of the machine is often stored as an .ova or .ovf file.
.ova or .ovf.
Right. These acronyms stand for Open Virtualization Format. Think of an .ova file as a highly compressed zip archive. It contains the XML configuration parameters, basically the blueprint and the virtual hard drive, all bundled together for easy transport.
So it's the architectural schematic of the rented room. It tells the software how many virtual CPUs to build, how much virtual RAM to allocate, and what virtual network cards to attach.
Exactly. Then you have the .vmx file, which is a localized text file storing the specific granular configuration settings for that individual VM
Okay,
instance.
got it.
But the absolute holy grail of digital evidence, the payload you are really hunting for, is the .vmdk file.
.vmdk.
Yes, this stands for virtual machine disk. This single massive file is the literal embodiment of the entire virtual hard drive.
Wow, so everything is in there.
Everything. Every single Word document, every downloaded illicit file, every line of browser history, and the entire operating system of the virtual machine lives compressed inside this one .vmdk file.
And what about the volatile memory? If the VM was actively running when we imaged the host, where does the virtual RAM live?
Good question. VMware manages virtual memory by creating a .vm file on the host's hard drive.
.vmm, like a virtual memory.
Exactly. This file acts as the paging file, actively serving as the physical backing for the virtual machine's RAM. You'll also invariably find .log files in the directory.
Which are just standard logs, right?
Right. These are the meticulous diaries of the VM, recording exactly when the machine was powered on, when it was forcefully shut down, or critically, if the user mapped a physical USB drive through the host directly into the VM.
Oh, that's a huge clue.
Huge. And finally, you have the .nram file, which is a tiny file that keeps track of the virtual machine's basic BIOS state.
Now, what if the suspect wasn't using VMware? What if they preferred the open source route and used Oracle VirtualBox?
The conceptual architecture is identical, but the file structure and extensions are entirely different.
Okay, so what are we looking for there?
If an investigator is hunting for VirtualBox files, they would search the Windows registry, specifically looking under the HKey class's root hive for any associations with the .vdi extension.
.vd.
Right, .vdi stands for Virtual Disk Image, and it is Oracle's proprietary equivalent of the .vmdk file.
But there is a massive operational catch here, isn't there?
There is indeed.
Imagine you are a well-funded corporate investigator. You have top-tier, incredibly expensive forensic software suites at your disposal tools, like Autopsy, Access Data's FTK Imager, or OS Forensics.
Top-of-the-line stuff.
Right. You finally locate the suspect's hidden .vdi file, you load it into your $10,000 software suite, and it fails.
It just crashes or won't read.
Exactly. The tool simply can't read it.
Yeah.
Why does that happen?
It happens because of vendor lock-in and proprietary formatting. Many professional, industry-standard forensic tools are highly optimized, specifically to parse open or enterprise-standard formats like .vmdk or Microsoft's .vhd format.
But not Oracle's.
Right. They do not natively understand the block allocation structures of Oracle's proprietary .vdi format.
So what do? Are you just stuck?
No, to bridge this gap, the investigator has to utilize a very specific, powerful command line tool built natively into the VirtualBox ecosystem called VBoxManage.
VBoxManage.
Yes. By dropping into the terminal and executing the VBoxManage clone command, the investigator can force the software to translate and convert the proprietary .vdi file block by block into a widely accepted .vmdk, .vhd, or even a raw bitstream format.
That's incredibly useful.
It is.
Yeah.
Once converted, the forensic tools can easily mount and parse the data.
So it's a translator.
Exactly. And a crucial pro tip for anyone taking notes out there.
Yeah.
If you are running that conversion command in a Linux forensic environment, VBoxManage is strictly case sensitive.
Oh, man.
Yeah, a single misplaced capital letter will cause the command to fail, which could be incredibly frustrating during a high-pressure investigation.
I can imagine. Okay, so we understand the standard file structures. We know what to look for. But suspects are evolving rapidly, and they are getting incredibly clever.
They really are.
Our forensic sources detail a concept called nested VMs, and frankly, this sounds like absolute digital inception.
It is the literal definition of digital inception.
Okay, explain this to me.
A nested VM is exactly what it sounds like. It is a fully functioning virtual machine running completely inside another virtual machine.
Wow.
Picture this architecture. A suspect has a standard Windows host computer. On that Windows host, they install a Type 2 hypervisor and spin up an Ubuntu Linux VM.
Okay, standard so far.
Right. But then inside that Ubuntu Linux VM, they install a secondary hypervisor and they spin up a highly encrypted, deeply obscured secondary Linux VM.
That is insane.
It gets worse. The actual criminal activity, the malware development, the dark web routing, it takes place entirely within that secondary nested inner layer.
That is a total nightmare from an investigative standpoint. Because if I just image the Windows host, I might see the first layer.
Right, the first Ubuntu VM.
But to prove the crime, I have to forensically peel back the outer VM just to discover that there is a second encrypted environment hidden inside it.
Exactly. It is a massive resource drain for investigators.
Yeah.
And the evasion tactics go even further than that.
What else can they do?
Well, sophisticated suspects might not even keep the virtual machine files on the host computer's hard drive at all.
Where would they put them?
They might configure the hypervisor to run a live VM directly off an attached high-speed external USB solid-state drive.
Oh, that is clever.
Right. They walk into the office, plug the tiny USB drive into their corporate workstation, boot up the hypervisor, map it to the external drive, and do all their illicit work entirely within the VM. And when they are done, they simply shut down the VM, unplug the USB drive, drop it in their pocket, and walk out of the building.
The entire criminal computer just walked out the front door.
Exactly.
So if the actual hard drive of the virtual machine is physically sitting in the suspect's pocket, how do you mathematically prove that the crime originated from their specific workstation?
You have to look elsewhere.
Right. How do you tie the phantom machine back to the physical desk?
You interrogate the host's physical hardware logs.
Hardware logs.
Yes. Modern Windows operating systems, deeply embedded within the system registry, specifically under the USB-A store key, meticulously log the exact hardware IDs, vendor names, and precise timestamps every single time a USB mass storage device is physically attached or detached from the system.
Okay, so it leaves a permanent record of the USB.
Exactly. You might not have the .vmdk file because it's literally in their pocket, but you have absolute unassailable system log proof that the suspect attached a massive high-speed external drive to their workstation at the exact second the corporate data breach initiated on the network.
You use the peripheral logs to build circumstantial but highly damning evidence.
Exactly right.
Okay, I want to pivot slightly and push back on a very common assumption regarding virtual machines. Let's go back to my real estate analogy from earlier.
Okay, sure.
Finding these .vmdk files is like finding a safe hidden behind a painting.
Right.
But virtualization software has a very famous feature called a snapshot. A snapshot allows a user to save the exact state of the virtual machine at a specific moment in time so they can roll back to it later if they make a mistake.
Yep, like a save game.
Like Tiana's scenario in the test bank. There's a massive misconception among junior analysts who think that if they just locate and grab the snapshot files, that is entirely sufficient to recover all the evidence of what the suspect was doing.
I see this mistake all the time.
If a snapshot captures the state of the machine, why isn't that enough?
Relying solely on a snapshot is an incredibly dangerous investigative trap that could entirely jeopardize a major case.
Why is that?
To understand why, you have to understand how a snapshot functions at the block data level. A snapshot is fundamentally not a full standalone backup of the virtual machine.
It's not.
No. Think of it like taking a photograph of a crime scene room at exactly 12:00 p.m. The photograph perfectly captures the state of the room at that moment.
Right.
But if the suspect walks in and moves all the furniture around at 12:05 p.m., your 12:00 p.m. photograph obviously doesn't show the new layout.
Right. You missed it.
In virtual machine architecture, a snapshot only records the differential changes in state from the exact moment the snapshot was triggered. It only records the delta.
So it's just a ledger of what changed, not a copy of everything that exists.
Precisely. It relies entirely on the base.vmdk image to function. If you are an investigator and you only acquire the original base VM file but fail to collect the subsequent snapshots, you might completely miss all the critical illicit activity that happened after the original file was created.
So you're missing the most important part.
Exactly. The malware installation, the data exfiltration, all of that might only exist in the differential snapshot layers that you ignored.
Wow.
And conversely, if you only manage to extract a snapshot file, but you don't have the base.vmdk image to apply it to, the snapshot data is functionally unreadable garbage.
Because it has nothing to attach to.
Right. It's a list of changes to a starting point you don't even possess.
That makes total sense.
This is exactly why, if you encounter a suspect's virtual machine and it is currently actively running on the screen, simply taking a static copy of the files on disk is completely insufficient.
You have to do more.
You must perform a live acquisition of the running VM to ensure you capture the absolute current real-time state of the environment. You have to integrate all of those complex differential snapshot layers into one cohesive, readable image.
And that critical revelation, the fact that a static, powered-down copy of files on a hard drive simply isn't enough to capture the full truth of a modern digital crime, leads us perfectly into the core of this deep dive.
The live stuff.
Yes, we are shifting away from static files and stepping into the highly volatile, electrified world of live acquisitions.
This is where it gets really stressful.
I bet. Why have the rules of engagement changed so drastically? Why are digital forensics teams suddenly being forced to actively intervene and run tools while the crime scene is still a live, hostile environment?
Because the fundamental nature of cybercrime has evolved dramatically over the last decade.
How so?
15 years ago, cybercrime often involved a suspect downloading a static spreadsheet of stolen client credit card data and saving it locally to their C drive.
Right, very simple.
If you seize the hard drive, you found the spreadsheet. Done deal.
Right.
But today, enterprise security is dealing with advanced persistent threats, or APTs. We are dealing with active, real-time network intrusions, and critically, we're facing the rise of fileless malware.
Fileless malware, that sounds like a contradiction.
It does, but it's a terrifying class of malicious software that intentionally never writes a single byte of data to the physical hard drive.
So where does it live?
It injects itself directly into the legitimate processes of the operating system and lives entirely within the system's volatile RAM.
Oh, wow.
So if you suspect an employee is currently accessing highly restricted corporate servers they shouldn't be, or if a piece of fileless ransomware is silently encrypting the network, the footprints of those attacks do not exist on the hard drive.
They aren't on the metal.
Exactly. If you pull the power plug to preserve the hard drive, you preserve nothing, because the attacker was never there. They only exist in the running processes, the open network sockets, and the electrical current of the RAM.
Which brings us to a foundational concept that every single IT student, business major, and future network administrator absolutely needs to sear into their brain.
The order of volatility.
The order of volatility, commonly referred to as the OOV. This is essentially the biological lifespan of digital data. What exactly is the hierarchy here?
The order of volatility dictates the exact chronological lifespan of how long data survives on a live system. And therefore, it strictly dictates the prioritized order in which an investigator must collect that data before it vanishes into the ether.
Okay.
It is entirely driven by the physical hardware architecture of a computer. The hierarchy, starting from the most incredibly volatile data to the most stable, begins at the very top with the CPU cache.
Wait, hold on. There is a very common trap a lot of junior analysts fall into here.
What's that?
They assume system RAM is the absolute peak of volatility, but functionally, isn't the CPU cache actually turning over significantly faster? Does the cache hold more or less data than a RAM?
It holds exponentially less, which is exactly why it turns over so fast.
Okay, explain that.
The CPU cache, which is broken down into L1, L2, and L3 cache, is incredibly small. We're talking about mere megabytes of storage.
Tiny.
Very tiny. But it sits physically directly on the silicon die of the processor. Its entire purpose is to feed microscopic instructions to the CPU instantly, bypassing the relatively slow trip to the system RAM. Right. Because the cache is so infinitesimally small, and the CPU processes billions of instructions per second, the data in the CPU cache is constantly being overwritten in a matter of nanoseconds.
A nanosecond.
Yeah. So yes, technically, from an architectural standpoint, the CPU cache is the absolute most volatile data on a machine. However, practically speaking, for 99% of commercial and law enforcement forensics, capturing the CPU cache before it overwrites is functionally impossible.
It's just too fast.
Way too fast. Therefore, the primary actionable target at the top of the list is the next item down, system RAM.
The random access memory.
Exactly. After securing the RAM, the order of volatility moves down the chain to system processes and network states, then to active network routing tables and ARP caches, then to temporary system logs.
And then finally, the hard drive.
Right. Down at the very bottom of the volatility list is the actual physical hard drive, where data can sit statically powered down for decades.
And it's absolutely crucial to note for our networking students. Whether you are dealing with a Windows 11 workstation, an enterprise Linux server, or a macOS laptop, they all obey this exact same hardware-driven order of volatility.
They absolutely do.
The laws of Silicon do not care what operating system you are running.
No, hardware is hardware.
So let's talk about the payload. What actually lives in that system, RAM?
Good stuff.
If I'm an investigator on the scene and I'm prioritizing RAM collection above everything else, sweating bullets that the machine might crash, what am I desperately hoping to extract from that memory dump?
You are hoping to extract the unencrypted keys to the kingdom.
Literally.
Literally.
Right.
By definition, absolutely anything that the computer is currently processing but hasn't yet committed to the physical hard drive lives in the RAM.
And that's a lot of stuff.
It's an absolute goldmine. This includes plaintext passwords the user just typed into a login portal. It includes the decryption keys for securely locked volumes. It includes the raw, unencrypted instructions being sent by stealthy malware to a command and control server.
So the malware unmasks itself in the RAM.
Exactly. It holds inactive, incognito browser tabs that the user thinks are invisible. It holds partially written, unsaved Word documents or highly sensitive corporate emails.
That's incredible.
Think about the implications for enterprise security. If a suspect has a heavily encrypted hard drive using BitLocker or Veracrypt, but the machine is currently sitting on their desk, unlocked and actively running, the mathematical decryption key required to read that hard drive is currently sitting in plain text right there in the active RAM.
Just waiting to be scooped up.
Exactly. But if you panic and pull the power plug, that decryption key instantly vanishes from the memory.
And then you're locked out.
Completely. The hard drive locks shut, and you will mathematically never, ever get into that drive again.
But this brings up a massive, glaring paradox that we really have to address. The fundamental golden rule of traditional forensics, the absolute prime directive, is never, ever alter the original evidence.
Right. Analyze the copy, preserve the original.
Exactly. But if I plug a USB drive into the suspect's computer and run a software tool to capture the RAM, that software tool is an executable program.
Yes, it is.
And to run an executable program, the operating system must allocate RAM to it.
Yes. That is the unavoidable reality.
This feels like having to use the suspect's own flashlight to search the dark crime scene room. The very act of turning the flashlight on burns up the battery evidence, but without it, you can't see the room at all.
That's a very visceral way to put it.
If running my live acquisition tool inherently overwrites a portion of the suspect's RAM just to function, how on earth do we legally and ethically justify intentionally destroying evidence on a live system?
It is the defining paradox of live forensics. It's often called the observer effect.
The observer effect.
Right. The act of observing the memory inherently alters the memory. But it is a calculated necessary risk, and it reflects the harsh reality of modern incident triage.
Walk you through a scenario.
Okay, picture this scenario, like Kenneth's active intrusion scenario from our coursework. You are the lead incident responder for a massive hospital network. The network monitoring systems start flashing red. There is an active, aggressive ransomware intrusion happening right now, laterally moving across the patient database servers.
So the attackers are actively inside the network, hands on keyboards.
Exactly. They are live. You deploy a live memory acquisition tool to the affected server. By running that tool, your software will undeniably overwrite a small, specific portion of the server's RAM.
Which destroys evidence.
It will destroy whatever arbitrary data happened to be sitting in that specific microscopic memory address. That overwritten information is permanently altered and can never be reproduced for a court. However, you are making a triage decision. The overwhelming critical value of catching the active attacker in the memory, identifying their external IP address, extracting the malware's command structure, or recovering the unencrypted admin password they are using far, far outweighs the minor loss of those few megabytes of random background RAM data.
So you sacrifice a tiny piece of the crime scene to catch the killer in the act.
Precisely. You break the golden rule to save the case. But because you are actively and intentionally altering the suspect machine, the standard of documentation must be absolutely flawless.
You can't just wing it.
You cannot just click around. Every single keystroke you make, every specific tool you execute, every piece of data you copy must be meticulously logged.
Right.
And the absolute non-negotiable critical step to maintain legal defensibility is this.
What is it?
The exact millisecond you extract that RAM data, you must run it through a hashing algorithm like SHA-256 to generate a mathematically unique digital fingerprint of that file. Right. This hash value proves to a judge or a defense attorney that from the exact moment the data left the volatile RAM and entered your secure possession, the file was never altered, tampered with, or corrupted again.
Okay, so we've logically justified why we have to step into the active crime scene. We understand the ticking clock and the stakes of volatile memory. Now, we need to know exactly what tools to bring in our bag to minimize the destruction of evidence and maximize the recovery of the data.
And this requires extreme precision. Our industry source materials actually lay out a very strict 6-step operational procedure for executing a live acquisition securely and effectively.
Okay, let's walk through the playbook. How do we do this right?
Step 1. You must prepare in advance by creating or downloading a bootable forensic CD or a dedicated forensic USB drive.
Okay, so bring your own gear.
Exactly.
Correct.
You want to run your specialized extraction tools entirely from your external source. You absolutely never want to install a new program, like an antivirus or a forensic suite, directly onto the suspect's physical hard drive.
Because that overwrites data.
Installing a program requires writing massive amounts of data to the disk, which would permanently overwrite vast swaths of potential deleted evidence in the unallocated space.
Got it. What's next?
Step 2. As we just discussed, initiate an obsessive granular log of all your actions on the machine.
Document everything.
Step 3. When you extract the data, you must send the collected information directly to a secure network drive or your own external forensic drive.
Okay, I want to explicitly highlight that point because it's a catastrophic mistake I've seen junior techs make in training.
Oh, it happens all the time.
If you are doing a live acquisition of a workstation, the absolute cardinal rule is, where do you send the data? It is never, under any circumstances, saved to the local internal drive of the suspect's machine.
Never. Think about the math. Modern workstations easily have 16 or 32 gigabytes of RAM.
Right.
If you extract a 32 gigabyte memory dump and casually save that file onto the suspect's internal C drive, you just forcefully overwrote 32 gigabytes of the hard drive's slack space.
That's a massive footprint.
You just effectively destroyed 32 gigabytes of deleted emails, hidden registry keys, or historical logs that the overarching investigation desperately needed. You always pipe the data out to your own sterile external drive or push it securely over the network.
Okay, so step 4. You execute the tool to copy the physical memory, the RAM, out to your secure drive. Step 5. You perform any incident-specific secondary steps, like capturing the active routing tables or the open network sockets.
Right.
And finally, step 6. You immediately generate that cryptographic hash value of everything you recovered to lock in the chain of custody.
That's the playbook.
So, practically speaking, if I'm building my forensic toolkit, what specific software platforms am I actually using to execute this delicate operation?
Well, if you are operating within a standard Windows enterprise environment, there are several heavy-hitting tools you need to be familiar with.
Like what?
You have Access Data's FTK Imager, which is incredibly reliable and an absolute industry standard for memory and disk imaging.
Yep, FTK is everywhere.
You have Belkasoft RAM Capture, which is highly effective and operates with a very small footprint. And importantly, for complex intrusions, you have Mandiant Memorize.
Mandiant Memorize is a fascinating piece of software. Why is it called out specifically when dealing with advanced threats? What makes it different from just a basic RAM copier?
It is called out because of its advanced surgical capabilities against highly sophisticated malware, specifically rootkits.
Okay, let's define that. A rootkit is essentially a class of malware designed to deeply embed itself into the lowest levels of the operating system.
Yep.
Its entire purpose is to lie to the investigator, subvert the OS, and hide its own presence from standard antivirus scans.
Exactly. Standard memory tools often ask the Windows API, basically the operating system's messenger, to list all the active processes and network connections.
Just asking politely.
Right. But if a rootkit has infected the system, it intercepts that request and lies to the tool, hiding its malicious network socket.
It just says, nope, nothing to see here.
Exactly. But Mandiant Memorize is built to bypass those lies. It doesn't ask the Windows API for a list.
What does it do?
Instead, it dives directly into the raw, unstructured memory space. It scans the raw memory structures directly, looking for the specific mathematical signatures of open network sockets and active processes.
Wow, it goes straight to the source.
It could see the true network connections buried in the raw memory, entirely bypassing the rootkit's attempts to hide them. It shows you exactly who the computer is secretly talking to on the internet.
Now, a lot of modern forensic tools boast beautiful graphical user interfaces, or GUIs.
Yeah, they look great.
They look like normal, polished Windows programs with sleek buttons, drop-down menus, and progress bars. But the strict guidance from incident response veterans is that we should actively avoid using GUI tools on a live system whenever possible.
Strongly avoid them.
Why is a pretty interface dangerous?
Because graphical user interfaces are incredibly unnecessarily resource-intensive. Think about what a GUI requires from the operating system. To draw a sleek window, render the shadows, manage the mouse cursor interrupts, and animate a progress bar. The Windows Desktop Window Manager has to constantly allocate and reallocate massive chunks of system RAM and CPU cycles.
So it's churning the memory.
Exactly. If you use a heavy GUI tool to capture the RAM, the tool itself violently churns the exact memory space the investigator is desperately trying to preserve. You are destroying evidence just to draw the next button on the screen.
That's a terrible trade-off.
Furthermore, in complex Windows environments, the heavy memory footprint of GUI tools can occasionally cause the operating system to shift memory addresses rapidly, leading to corrupted or smeared false readings in the final memory capture.
So what's the sterile alternative?
The alternative is returning to the roots of computing. Command line tools.
Just text.
Running software via a stark, text-based terminal prompt. It is admittedly intimidating for beginners who are used to point-click interfaces, but command line tools are the ultimate surgical instruments.
Because they're lightweight.
They have a microscopic memory footprint. They use barely any RAM to execute, which drastically minimizes the destruction of evidence. And critically, they give the investigator precise, granular, parameter-driven control over exactly how the acquisition process executes.
And what if we step outside the Microsoft ecosystem? What if you are an incident responder tasked with pulling volatile RAM from a compromised enterprise Linux database server?
Oh man, Linux introduces a whole new level of extreme complexity for live acquisitions.
How so?
Windows is relatively standardized, right? The core architecture is highly uniform across most machines. Linux, however, is notoriously fragmented.
Well, because of all the distribution.
Exactly. You have dozens of different major distributions or flavors, like Ubuntu, Red Hat Enterprise, CentOS, and Debian.
Right.
And worse, server administrators frequently compile their own custom, highly specific versions of the Linux kernel.
Oh, wow.
Because of this massive fragmentation, a memory capture tool that works perfectly on one Linux server might instantly crash a different Linux server.
So what's the solution?
Because of this danger, there are really only two specialized tools that are universally trusted by experts for Linux live memory acquisitions.
What are they?
LIME, which stands for Linux Memory Extractor, and the Volatility Framework. And crucially, both of these powerful tools rely absolutely heavily on command line execution and deep knowledge of kernel architecture.
Okay, so far we've talked exclusively about grabbing the whole pie, grabbing the entire 32 gigabytes of RAM, or imaging the entire 2 terabyte physical disk. But what if we don't need everything?
Like a targeted search.
Right. What if we are doing what's called a selective live acquisition? Picture this like Antonella's scenario. You are investigating an internal corporate policy violation.
Okay.
You know, the suspect employee exclusively uses one specific hidden folder on their C drive to store stolen proprietary source code. You don't care about their operating system files or their personal photos. You just want that one specific folder of evidence.
Well, in that scenario, imaging a massive 2 terabyte hard drive just to extract a single 50 megabyte folder is a massive waste of time, storage space, and analytical resources.
It's overkill.
It violates the principle of efficiency entirely. To perform a targeted, local selective acquisition, the investigator essentially needs 3 administrative prerequisites.
What are they?
First, they absolutely must possess the user's account access and password to actually log into the system and decrypt the user's profile space.
Makes sense.
Second, they ideally need the computer's overarching local administrator credentials to forcefully bypass any complex file permissions or read locks the suspect might have placed on the folder.
Okay.
And third, obviously, they need a sterile target media drive properly formatted to save the copied files onto.
And what software tools are utilized for this? Do they need to fire up a $10,000 forensic suite just to copy a folder?
Not at all. For purely selective file copying, elegant simplicity is best.
What's the best option?
An investigator can utilize highly robust native Windows DOS commands that have been built into the operating system for decades, specifically Xcopy or the more advanced Robocopy, which stands for Robust File Copy.
Oh, Robocopy. I've used that.
These command line utilities are incredibly powerful. They can securely and rapidly copy deep, complex directory structures. But most importantly for forensics, Robocopy can be configured via command line flags to perfectly preserve all the original file metadata.
Like the timestamps.
Exactly, the exact timestamps of when the file was modified, accessed, and created, known as the MA times.
And that's critical for court.
Preserving those original timestamps is absolutely crucial for establishing a timeline of the crime in a court of law. If you just drag and drop the folder using the Windows mouse, Windows alters the accessed and created timestamps to the current date, fundamentally altering the evidence.
Okay, let me present a very realistic logistical problem here regarding local acquisitions. Let's imagine you are the lead investigator for a multinational bank. You have a copy of FTK Imager loaded onto your forensic laptop, but the prime suspect's workstation is physically locked in a secure executive office suite on the completely opposite side of a sprawling, heavily guarded corporate campus.
Like Clarice's test bank scenario.
Exactly. You literally cannot get into the room to plug in your USB drive. You try to be clever. You try to use FTK Imager to reach across the corporate network and pull the RAM remotely over the LAN.
Oh, let's see where this is going.
But the connection instantly fails. Why?
It fails because traditional tools like FTK Imager are fundamentally engineered and optimized for local physical acquisitions.
Right.
They generally only possess the capability to handle physical drives that are plugged directly into the investigator's own machine via USB or SATA, or, at best, locally mapped, unobstructed network drives on a simple subnet.
So they can't handle complex networks.
They're absolutely not engineered to punch through complex corporate firewalls, navigate sophisticated enterprise VLAN routing, and securely drag tens of gigabytes of raw, highly sensitive memory across a sprawling, segmented corporate network.
The network would freak out.
The network security appliances will view that massive, strange data pull as a network attack and instantly kill the connection.
Which perfectly tees up the absolute necessity for our next major topic. When physical access to the machine is utterly impossible, investigators must learn how to cross networks and sometimes how to cross international borders to secure the data.
Remote acquisitions.
Exactly. This brings us to Section 5, the long arm of forensics, diving into remote acquisitions.
Remote acquisition is the highly specialized process of connecting to, monitoring, and imaging a target device entirely over a network connection, sometimes spanning across the world.
Which is huge right now.
In our modern, post-pandemic corporate reality, where a massive percentage of employees work from home, connecting company VPNs from coffee shops across the globe, this is no longer a niche, specialized skill.
It's the norm.
It is the absolute primary methodology for how corporate e-discovery, internal investigations, and incident response are conducted. You can't fly an investigator to an employee's house in another state just to image a laptop. You have to do it over the wire.
But implementing that sounds incredibly difficult and technically daunting.
It is phenomenally expensive, and it requires deep, specialized, cross-disciplinary knowledge.
What else do you need to know?
When you are performing remote acquisitions, you aren't just a digital forensics expert anymore. You have to simultaneously act as a high-level network engineer.
Oh, wow.
You need to possess overarching enterprise domain administration privileges to authorize the access. You must deeply understand corporate firewall configurations and port forwarding rules to allow the data to pass through.
And the bandwidth.
Critically, you have to meticulously calculate network bandwidth limitations. If you try to pull a 500 gigabyte hard drive image over a weak home Wi-Fi connection, you could saturate the employee's entire network connection for days, which is highly disruptive and prone to failure.
And beyond the immense technical hurdles, the legal and jurisdictional hurdles are a complete minefield. Let's look at a highly realistic, terrifying scenario for corporate compliance.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine you are the lead internal investigator working at the corporate headquarters of a massive multinational corporation in the United States.
Okay, tracking.
Your chief information security officer tells you to immediately perform a remote covert data acquisition on the company laptop of a suspected rogue employee who is allegedly stealing client lists.
High stakes again?
Yes, the technical problem. That specific employee works out of the company's European branch office located in London in the United Kingdom, like Tia's scenario.
International waters.
Their laptop is physically sitting on a desk in the UK. You have the IP address, you have the administrative network credentials. Technically, you could just execute the remote tool and start downloading their hard drive to your server in the US. Can you legally just click download?
Absolutely. Categorically not.
Why not? They work for a US company.
Doesn't matter. If you simply connect to that machine across the ocean and pull that data without strict legal authorization, you could instantly expose your entire parent company to massive international lawsuits, crippling regulatory fines, and potentially void the entire internal investigation.
Wow.
The international dilemma is arguably the most perilous, complex part of remote enterprise acquisitions.
What are the specific legal steps the investigator needs to execute before ever touching the keyboard?
First, they must immediately consult the company's internal HR and legal compliance departments to verify the exact contractual employment agreements.
Like what they signed.
Did that London-based employee sign a highly specific privacy waiver or an acceptable use policy that explicitly legally surrenders their right to digital privacy on that corporate-owned device?
And if they did?
Even if they did. Second, and far more importantly, the investigator has to navigate the UK's incredibly strict data privacy laws and data sovereignty regulations.
You were talking about the GDPR.
The General Data Protection Regulation, or the UK Data Protection Act. European digital privacy laws are vastly more stringent and protective of the employee than standard U.S. employment laws.
Interesting.
Just because the overarching parent company is headquartered in the United States does absolutely not mean that U.S. law applies to a digital device that is physically, geographically located within the jurisdiction of London.
So you can't just drag the files over?
No. By pulling that data across the ocean, you are performing a cross-border data transfer of potentially sensitive personal information, which is highly regulated.
So what's the play?
Finally, the absolute best practice in this scenario is actually for the U.S. investigator not to perform the pull themselves.
Really?
The legally sound maneuver is to hire local, certified, UK-based forensic experts who intimately understand the nuances of cross-border data transfer, local jurisdiction, and local legal standards to handle the physical or remote acquisition within the borders of the UK.
Okay, let's assume the intense legal hurdles are cleared. The lawyers have signed off, the jurisdiction is approved, and we have the green light.
Okay, wheels up.
What are the heavyweight, enterprise-grade software tools we actually use to reach across the public internet, penetrate the remote network, and securely pull gigabytes of sensitive data back to our lab?
The forensic source materials highlight 3 major industry-leading enterprise tools built specifically for this architecture.
Okay, number 1.
The first is Belkasoft Remote Acquisition, commonly referred to in the industry as Belkasoft R.
Belkasoft R.
This tool is incredibly versatile and widely deployed. It has the capability to remotely acquire forensic data from internal workstation drives, attached external USBs, volatile physical memory, and incredibly even connected mobile devices like iPhones or Androids that the employee has plugged into their remote laptop.
Wow. How does the architecture actually work? How does my server in New York talk to a laptop in Los Angeles?
It operates using an agent and endpoint architecture.
Agent and endpoint.
The investigator's machine, acting as the central command server, pushes a tiny specialized piece of software called the agent across the corporate network to the target suspect's computer, which is designated as the endpoint.
Okay.
This agent installs itself quietly in the background memory of the endpoint, systematically gathers the requested forensic data locally on the machine, and then streams that data continuously back across the network to the investigator server.
But wait, let's look at the massive security vulnerability here.
What's that?
If I'm the suspect and my company is remotely pulling my entire 500 gigabyte hard drive across the public internet, couldn't a malicious hacker sitting at a coffee shop intercept that massive data stream mid-transit and steal all my files and the company's proprietary data?
That is a critical, absolutely valid security concern, which is exactly why enterprise tools like Belkasoft R utilize SSL TLS certificates.
Okay, so it's encrypted.
Yes. When the agent connects back to the server, it initiates a cryptographic handshake and establishes a secure sockets layer, a deeply encrypted, mathematically secure transit tunnel between the remote endpoint and the investigator server.
So it's safe.
All the forensic data is heavily encrypted before it even leaves the suspect's laptop. Even if a highly skilled hacker intercepts the data packets as they travel over the public internet, all they will see is mathematically scrambled, unreadable static.
Awesome.
Without the private decryption key held only by the investigator's server, the intercepted data is completely useless.
Brilliant. Securing the transit is vital. What's the next major tool in the remote arsenal?
F-Response Collect. This is an absolute titan in the world of corporate e-discovery and incident response.
What makes it a titan?
What makes F-Response so incredibly valuable to enterprise IT teams is that it doesn't just look at local Windows laptops. It has the architecture to pull massive data sets from remote Linux file servers, Apple environments, and complex cloud architectures.
Oh, that's flexible.
But its absolute greatest strategic strength, which is highly prized by legal teams during e-discovery, is its output format.
Why does the specific output format of the file matter so much to the legal team?
Because of interoperability. F-Response is designed to stream the remote data and create forensic images directly in the raw format, often known as a DD image.
Okay, a raw format.
Many highly expensive forensic software platforms intentionally utilize locked proprietary formats. For example, the popular NK software uses the .ezo1 format.
Right.
But the raw bitstream format is completely universal. It is an exact bit-for-bit duplicate with no proprietary wrappers or vendor-specific headers.
So anyone can read it.
Exactly. If an investigator uses F-Response to pull a remote image, they have the absolute guarantee that regardless of what specific, obscure software the outside legal counsel, the opposing counsel, or law enforcement uses down the line, every single one of them will be able to natively read and process that raw image file.
It prevents vendor lock-in during a trial.
Exactly.
And the final tool on the remote list.
Magnet AXIOM Cyber. This is the modern, cutting-edge, go-to platform for cloud-native investigations.
Cloud-native?
Right. If an investigator needs to remotely acquire data, not from a physical laptop sitting on a desk, but from an overarching corporate cloud infrastructure, like an Amazon Web Services S3 storage bucket, or a running AWS EC2 virtual instance magnet AXIOM Cyber, is built with the specific API integrations to interface directly with those complex cloud architectures.
That's incredibly powerful.
And allows the investigator to authenticate with the cloud provider and pull the data down forensically, maintaining the chain of custody, even when the data physically resides in an Amazon data center somewhere in the world.
Okay, we have outlined this incredibly sophisticated architecture. We have millions of dollars of advanced software shooting covert agents across deeply encrypted SSL tunnels, pulling raw data from cloud architectures. But I have to point out a very mundane, almost comical, fatal flaw in this entire master plan.
Oh, I know you're going to say, like Lucy's scenario.
Yes. Imagine you are executing a massive remote pull. You are using Belkasoft R to acquire a dense 1 terabyte hard drive from an endpoint laptop located in another state. Because of network bandwidth limits, the software estimates it is going to take 6 hours to stream all that data back to your server.
Okay.
What happens to that $1 million encrypted tunnel if the suspect's laptop simply goes to sleep after 15 minutes of inactivity while we are downloading?
You have just described the absolute bane of every single remote investigator's existence.
It's so silly.
It is the most frustrating reality of the job. If the endpoint computer goes into a standard power-saving sleep mode, or even hibernation, the operating system shuts down power to the network interface card to save the battery.
And then what?
The moment the network card powers down, the TCP network connection instantly times out. The encrypted SSL tunnel violently collapses, the data stream severs, and the entire 6-hour acquisition completely fails.
$1 million of cutting-edge forensic software entirely defeated by a standard Windows screensaver.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is the ultimate Achilles heel. This is exactly why a massive, unglamorous part of enterprise IT forensics is the prep work.
What do you do?
Long before the investigator ever clicks the Acquire button, they must work quietly with the overarching system administrators. The admins must silently push a network-wide group policy update specifically targeted to the suspect's machine.
A group policy.
Right. This invisible policy update forcefully overrides the user's local settings, completely disabling all power-saving modes, disabling the sleep timers, and disabling the screensavers. You have to force the endpoint to stay awake, burning power, until the entire data pull is successfully completed.
That makes total sense. So let's assume we navigate all of that successfully. We kept the machine awake, and we succeeded. We've pulled the data, whether locally via a complex RAM capture or remotely across the world via an encrypted tunnel.
We got the goods.
We have the data securely in our lab, we load it into our tools and sit down to analyze the files. But what if the attacker, or the advanced malware they deployed on the system, is actively trying to gaslight us? Oh, they love to gaslight.
What if the malware is incredibly sophisticated? It runs, it steals the data, it changes its file names to hide, and then it permanently deletes itself from the hard drive to completely erase its tracks.
Very common.
If we are just staring at the static files remaining on the disk, we will see absolutely nothing wrong. The bad actor is gone. How do we see the history of what was deleted?
This brings us to our final, highly technical section. Unmasking the malware.
Okay, how do we unmask it?
This specific skill set is exactly where we separate the amateur IT workers from the veteran elite forensic analysts. Advanced modern malware does not just execute its payload and lazily sit on the desktop waiting to be found by an antivirus scan.
Right.
It runs in the background. It actively renames its own executable file to something highly innocuous like svcoast.exe or explorer.exe. to perfectly blend in with normal, legitimate Windows background processes.
Camouflage.
Exactly. It does its devastating damage, encrypts the network, and then it executes a self-deletion command to permanently wipe its executable from the hard drive, completely hiding its presence from static analysis.
So if you just run a standard forensic file scan, you will only see the files that currently exist. You will not see the malware that deleted itself 3 days ago.
Exactly.
So how do we catch a ghost? If the file is mathematically gone from the disk, how do we prove it was ever there?
We have to stop looking for the file itself, and instead, we interrogate the operating system's hidden, deeply embedded diary.
Okay.
And in the Windows ecosystem, we execute this by utilizing a very specific, powerful command line utility called fsutil.
fsutil, let me clarify a technical parameter for our networking and Linux students listening. Is this a cross-platform concept? Does this work on Apple or Linux servers?
No, it does not.
Okay.
fsutil is strictly, exclusively a native Windows DOS command.
Okay, Windows only.
It is engineered to interact directly and intimately with the proprietary architecture of the Windows NTFS, the new technology file system. And when we utilize fsutil, we are hunting for one very specific, deeply hidden metafile buried in the root of the file system.
What's it called?
It's called the USN Journal file.
The update sequence number journal.
Yes.
Let's break this down for anyone new to depth file system architecture. Why does Windows have this hidden journal? What exactly is this journal used for, legally or functionally, by the operating system?
Functionally, the USN Journal was designed by Microsoft as a disaster recovery and system integrity mechanism. It provides a persistent, undeniable, rolling history of all file system activity.
Okay, so it tracks everything.
To be clear, the journal does not store the actual contents of the files themselves. It doesn't hold the text of your Word documents or the pixels of your photos.
So what does it hold?
Instead, it meticulously logs the metadata of every single change made to any file or directory on the entire hard drive volume.
Like what kind of changes?
If a file is suddenly created, if a file is modified, if it is renamed, or critically, if it is deleted, the journal instantly records the exact, precise timestamp of the event, the file name involved, and the specific hexadecimal action code detailing exactly what happened.
Wow.
It is the ultimate, undeniable ledger for tracking highly suspicious file behavior.
You know, it is exactly like the registry ledger in a highly secure hotel.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, think about it. The hotel manager's registry book doesn't tell you what the guest actually did inside their private room, but the ledger meticulously records exactly what time the guest checked into the lobby, what time they requested a room change, the specific fake alias they registered under, and the exact millisecond they checked out and fled the building.
That's perfect.
Even if the guest representing the malware in this scenario is completely gone from the hotel, the room is empty, and the sheets are clean, the undeniable registry of their movement through the building is permanently stamped in ink in the manager's book.
That is an absolutely perfect conceptual analogy. The malicious executable file vanishes into the ether, but the undeniable ghost of its actions remains permanently etched in the journal.
So how do we actually pry open this hidden registry and read the ink? If I'm an investigator and I need to interrogate this journal to prove a malware infection occurred, what exactly do I type into the system?
First, the investigator must open the Windows command prompt, and they absolutely must run it with elevated full administrator privileges because the NJANO is highly protected by the operating system.
Makes sense.
Once at the administrative terminal prompt, they type the command sutil journal C.
sutil journal C, and what happens when they hit enter?
The command forcefully unpacks the journal and outputs the entire raw textual contents of the hidden DGen journal directly to the terminal screen.
Just a wall of text.
A huge wall.
Yeah.
You will suddenly see thousands of lines of dense data flowing past. You will see the specific USN tracking number, the file name in question, the file attributes, and crucially, the reason code.
What's a reason code?
The reason code is a hexadecimal string. For example, if you see 0s000000000100, that mathematically translates to file created.
Oh, I see.
If you see 0x00000000, that translates to file renamed to a new name, accompanied by the exact unquestionable timestamp of when the malware attempted to hide itself.
But practically speaking, there is a massive flaw with just dumping that to the screen.
What's that?
If a corporate workstation has been actively running for 6 months, tracking every single background file change the OS makes, that journal is going to be millions upon millions of lines long.
Yes, it is.
If I hit enter, it's just going to scroll past my eyes in an unreadable blur of matrix code. I can't read that fast.
Which is exactly why a seasoned investigator never, ever just outputs the command loosely to the terminal screen. Standard output is useless for massive datasets.
So what's the trick?
Instead, you use advanced command line syntax to pipe or seamlessly redirect that massive avalanche of output data into a static, highly searchable text file.
How do you do that?
So the investigator would actually type fsutil us, an IML Rio journal CF, victim-USN JRNL-JFJ-data.txt.
Ah, the greater than symbol.
Notice the greater than symbol. In command line architecture, that specific symbol intercepts the output that was destined for the screen and instead sends all millions of lines of data securely and quietly into a text file located safely on their external forensic drive.
And once it's safely contained in a static text file, an investigator who is actively hunting for gaslighting malware can just open it in a powerful text editor.
Exactly.
They can simply run a keyword search for known malicious file names, or they can filter the data looking for rapid create and delete commands happening within milliseconds of each other.
Which is a huge indicator.
Which is a massive glowing red flag, indicating an automated malware script trying to cover its tracks faster than a human ever could.
Exactly. Knowing how to leverage deep command line utilities like fsutil to aggressively interrogate the UN Journal is the defining hallmark of a true forensic analyst.
It's next-level skills.
It empowers you to definitively prove to corporate leadership or a jury that a cyber attack absolutely occurred and detail exactly what specific files the attackers targeted long after the malware has successfully deleted itself and tried to cover its tracks.
Okay, we have covered an absolutely incredible amount of highly technical, deeply practical ground today. Let's briefly recap the logical journey we just took.
That's good.
We started by exploring the phantom architecture of virtual machines. We broke down exactly how massive corporate enterprises utilize Type 1 bare metal hypervisors for immense scalability and performance.
And we showed why suspects prefer the isolated rented rooms of Type 2 hypervisors.
Right. We learned how to systematically track down the hidden .vmdk and .vdi files by interrogating the registry, and we definitively proved why relying on simple snapshots is never enough to capture the whole story.
Then we confronted the intense ticking clock of live memory acquisitions.
Yes, the order of volatility.
We discussed the hardware-driven order of volatility, emphasizing why we must prioritize capturing the RAM to secure unencrypted passwords and expose active network intrusions before they vanish.
We logically justified the forensic paradox of having to intentionally alter the crime scene to catch the attacker.
Using precise tools like FTK Imager and Volatility, and ensuring we hash absolutely everything to maintain unassailable legal integrity.
From there, we scaled up to the global enterprise level, exploring the intense legal, jurisdictional, and technical hurdles of remote acquisitions.
And we analyze how tools like Belkasoft R and Magnet AXIOM Cyber utilize encrypted SSL tunnels to pull data from cloud networks.
And we highlighted the absolute mundane necessity of utilizing group policy to turn off the target's sleep mode so a screensaver doesn't collapse a $1 million investigation.
Can't forget the screensaver.
And finally, we dove deep into the NTFS architecture, learning how to catch the ghosts of deleted gaslighting malware by interrogating the hidden USN Journal with the fsutil command.
It all fundamentally comes back to continuously adapting to the rapidly evolving modern digital landscape.
It moves fast.
The evidence is no longer just sitting passively on a desk waiting for you to find it. The bad actors are moving faster, hiding deeper, and operating entirely within the volatile ether of the network.
Exactly. Which brings us full circle right back to our opening hook.
The glowing screen.
The glowing screen in the dark office, the blinking cursor. You now fundamentally understand the mechanics of why pulling the power plug is no longer the default instinct of a trained professional.
You have to keep it alive.
The modern digital investigator must be brave enough and skilled enough to freeze time while the system is still alive and breathing. You have to navigate the volatile electrical currents of the system RAM to catch the bad actors in the exact millisecond they're acting.
That's what it takes.
To the incredible students of the Dr. Sam Pak College of Business, and to every single professional listening who is dedicated to leveling up their skills, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
If you found this practical breakdown valuable, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with your network. And please don't forget to check the description below for access to those extra high-value resources we curated for you.
Tons of good stuff in there.
We highly encourage you to review the channel for our other playlists, videos, and classes. Keep pushing your boundaries. Embrace lifelong continuous learning, build your technical toolkit, and truly own your career growth. You are building the foundation right now.
Great advice.
Join us next time as we push further down the rabbit hole and move into Chapter 10, Network Forensics, where we will learn how to track the data once it leaves the physical machine entirely and travels across the global wire.
I can't wait for that one.
But before we go, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Yes. As virtualization software becomes so advanced that it is entirely indistinguishable from physical hardware, and as our most sensitive corporate data increasingly lives not on local laptops but dynamically distributed across massive global ethereal cloud networks, ask yourself this.
What's the question?
In the near future, will the very concept of a physical hard drive even exist in the field of digital forensics? Or are we rapidly approaching a reality where every single investigation, without exception, will eventually become a live, remote acquisition of a phantom machine that doesn't physically exist?
That's a wrap on this episode of Digital Forensics. Until next time, analyze the copy, preserve the original.